Legendary Boston Celtics coach Red Auerbach once said that records are meant to be broken, but I think had he seen our video today, he might have sung a different and less inspirational tune. This list is all about the most ironclad and insurmountable achievements in the UFC's history books. The feats that, while we'll never say never, don't seem to likely be accomplished or surpassed ever again. It's time to dive into the top spots we could probably etch in stone. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are the 10 UFC records that may never be broken. Number 10. Most total losses. There are certain fighters that have a style the UFC absolutely loves, and that style would be fighting your ass off and putting people to sleep. Jeremy Stephens is the embodiment of what the UFC craves. He's like the song Face the Pain come to life. Stephens has 21 finishes in his 28 career wins, but it's another stat of his that's likely to hold in the record books for the foreseeable future. Despite his 15 victories, Stephens has 16 UFC losses, but his style is fun and fan-friendly, so he's had a home with the organization since 2007. A few fighters are creeping towards the record. Andrei Arlovski, Clay Guida, and Jim Miller all have 13, but retirement is not far for that group, and it's unclear whether they'd still be fighting for the company if they lost 3 more times. Stephens, on the other hand, is 33, just recently headlined a card, and of those 16 losses, only 2 have come via KO/TKO. He could be fighting for a very long time, and while another loss might put him on the UFC's chopping block, he certainly hasn't been let go yet, which means more fights and potentially a widening gap in that record. Number 9. Most combined significant strikes in a single fight. This stat is particularly impressive when you compare to a few other recent fights that were absolute slugfests, especially considering that Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega at UFC 231 only went 4 rounds. That's right, the doctor was like, I'm sorry, there's just too much awesomeness for this thing to go another 5 minutes. No, but seriously, Ortega was badly hurt. At a combined 400 significant strikes landed between the two fighters, there's not another fight within 40. In fact, number 2 is held by Max Holloway again in his bout with Dustin Poirier that went the distance at UFC 236. And in third place, the very recent and most awesome fight between Zhang Wei Li and Joanna Violence. They landed 351. Both of those fights were constant exchanges for 25 minutes. The difference maker here is that Holloway landed an insane 134 significant strikes in the final round of that fight. Previous to that, they were about on the pace of Usman versus Covington with 318 or so. So it's the combination of an insane amount of punishment taken in a single round by Ortega, and for the rest of the fight, both fighters having a fairly high output rate. If two of the craziest fights in the history of the sport would need a 6th round to tie this 4-round fight, it's safe to say this record will be standing for some time to come. Number 8. Longest average fight time. Dominick Cruz entered the UFC as one of the best and brightest from the WEC, the only blemish on his record avenged in his promotional debut against Uriah Faber at UFC 132. Since then, the Dominator has only had 5 more fights, but barring his comeback against Takeya Mizugaki at UFC 178, every single one of them were title fights, meaning they could potentially go the distance of 25 full minutes, and they did. All of them. And so when you factor in his 1-minute destruction of Mizugaki, Cruz holds the longest average fight time in UFC history at an even 21 minutes. Most fighters that will ever appear on the roster couldn't possibly reach that number, considering that, well, the majority will never get a chance to even be in a 5-round fight. The closest active fighter is Joanna Jędrzejczyk at 19 minutes and 24 seconds, which sounds really close, but consider this. In order for her to, at this point in her career, surpass Cruz, she would need her next 6 fights in a row to all be 25-minute decisions. They can't be any less, and they all have to go the distance. That is a lot of main events and a lot of miles on a car that's already seen quite a few races. Number 7. Shortest average fight time. You may not remember Drew McFedry's 9-fight run in the UFC from 2006 to 2009, his most notable win during that period coming against Marvin Eastman. But on the official UFC stats website, he holds an incredible distinction when you consider some of the other names on the list. McFedry's had an average fight time during his UFC career of 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Drew's 9 fights make him officially eligible for a place in the UFC's book of records, and there's not a chance in hell someone's going to have a shorter average time. Take, for example, Ronda Rousey, who's in third. The running joke during her career is that every single fight she was in could be shown in its entirety in an Instagram post. Her average fight time, 3 minutes and 6 seconds. A whole 46 seconds more than McFedry's. The closest currently active fighters on the roster are Todd Duffy and Johnny Walker, and both are more than a minute over the record. For whatever reason, Drew was in a hurry when he was in the octagon, whether he was winning or he was losing. He only had a single fight that went into the second round, and even that ended a minute later. You may not be well known to fans today, Drew, but your name will likely live on forever in the UFC's record books. Number 6. Most takedowns in a fight. What do you get when you put a Russian Sambo champion against a 4-time NAIA All-American wrestler? You get what you fucking deserve, which is apparently 21 takedowns in a single 3-round fight. At UFC 160, Khabib Nurmagomedov did his best Zangief impression by tossing Abel Trujillo all around the octagon for 15 minutes. The Eagle attempted 27 takedowns during the fight, and with Trujillo's wrestling background, he was able to get back to his feet most of the time. Each round went just about as you would think with that many attempts. The entire fight is nearly all Khabib tossing Trujillo, and then Abel recovering only to be brought back down to the mat. The next two closest fighters are Sean Sherk and Demetrius Johnson, with 16 and 14 respectively, but those were in 5-round fights. Khabib set the record in 3 rounds, and it's not likely to be broken, as it was the perfect storm that created it. Nurmagomedov, in only his 4th UFC fight, relying greatly on his throws, and a fighter with a strong wrestling background able to get the fight standing over and over and over again. The only fight I could ever see surpassing it is Tony versus Khabib. But we all know that's never going to happen.
How about you shut your goddamn mouth?
Number 5. The oldest champion. Randy Couture started his MMA career just shy of his 34th birthday. Not exactly a spring chicken in the world of mixed martial arts. At the age he was just starting his journey, most fighters are beginning to think about their exit strategy. Of course, Randy had a lifetime of wrestling experience behind him and hit the ground running, winning the UFC 13 heavyweight tournament at his first ever event. Smash cut to 2007, and the Natural is a 2-time heavyweight champion, a 2-time light heavyweight champion, and at 45 years of age, about to win his 3rd and final strap against Tim Sylvia at UFC 68. Couture would lose the belt in the very next fight to the Doomslayer Brock Lesnar, but there's no discounting his accomplishment, even if you argue that Sylvia was one of the division's weaker champions. For some perspective, the second oldest champion is Daniel Cormier at 40 years old. Imagine DC winning another title 5 years from now. Imagine Anderson Silva taking back the middleweight strap this year, or Vitor Belfort coming back to the UFC 3 years from now to beat a current champion. Maybe TRT Tour, but that's a different story. It's one of the most incredible feats yet seen in the octagon, and a record likely to stand the test of time. Number 4. Lowest pay-per-view sales in modern UFC history. We've entered a new era for the UFC in that they're no longer running pay-per-views through traditional television providers. A side effect of the ESPN Plus deal is that we don't really know the buy rates anymore for UFC events, and as such, it's not likely we'll ever get a pay-per-view that sells worse than UFC 224. At least that we know of publicly. The card was originally meant to be the much anticipated bout between Amanda Nunes and Chris Cyborg. However, that would have to wait until 232, and so Raquel Pennington was given her chance at Nunes' bantamweight strap. Despite names like Vitor Belfort, Jacare Souza, and Lyoto Machida, the arena in Rio wasn't even a sellout, and for the pay-per-view audience, there just wasn't a lot of drawing power in this one. When the dust cleared, 224 was sitting at 85,000 buys, by far the lowest pay-per-view number of the modern UFC era. It was reported that the promotion's initial ESPN Plus pay-per-view offering in UFC 236 was plagued with technical issues that dramatically affected buys, but even that show was said to have around 100,000 purchases. Of course, beyond that point, we simply do not know anymore, and as such, UFC 224 will likely forever hold this unfortunate honor. Number 3. Longest UFC title reign. When Anderson Silva won the middleweight title from Rich Franklin at UFC 64 in October 2006, Justin Timberlake had just released Sexy Back and was number 1 on the Billboard charts. When Silva lost that title to Chris Weidman nearly 100 UFC pay-per-views later, Timberlake had attempted an entire acting career and was making a comeback album to return to music. A lot can happen in 2,457 days. The one thing that didn't happen was the Spider dropping his strap, despite 10 different attempts by top contenders to do so. It didn't hurt that Anderson took 3 light heavyweight fights during that time period, but the second most consecutive defenses in UFC history isn't exactly milking it. The next closest title reign was Demetrius Johnson's at 2,142 days, just shy nearly a year, no big deal. Considering the next closest currently active champion is Amanda Nunes at 1,355 days, a whole 1,102 shy, the earliest she could break the record would be April of 2023. Consider all the great UFC reigns we've ever seen, and not one of them has come close. close. I think it's safe to say that if this record ever gets broken, it's not going to be for a very long time. Number 2. Longest losing streak. This is certainly one of the most impossible records to beat, and for BJ Penn, I'm sure it's not an accomplishment he would gladly place next to his Hall of Fame induction and his 2 UFC divisional championships. From the span of 2011 to 2019, Penn would lose 7 fights in a row in the promotion. There were several large breaks between some of the losses, but they are consecutive. Considering that after his loss to Rory McDonald in 2012, Dana White was already talking about wanting to see Penn retire, it's incredible that he would go on to lose another 5 fights. Even more incredible that he would be scheduled for another bout in 2019 against Nick Lentz until a few bar fights caught on camera put a halt to things. The UFC simply couldn't refuse BJ's never-ending drive to compete. He is a legend in the sport, and Dana White tends to have a soft spot for people who make a big impact in the early days of the promotion, which is another reason this record is not likely going to be broken. All the old-timers have nearly faded out completely, and Diego Sanchez is the only Tough One contestant still active on the roster. It's very unlikely the UFC will ever have such a soft spot for anyone in the future as to let them go anywhere near 7 losses straight without being cut from the promotion. Number 1. Most consecutive title defenses. He may have been discarded by the UFC in the first ever mixed martial arts fighter trade, but Demetrious Johnson will likely hold the most prestigious record in the organization's history forever. Johnson's record 11 title defenses is a feat that can only be fully understood when compared to other all-time greats. Anderson Silva and George St-Pierre were close, but both came up short. John Jones's original title run couldn't cut it. Jose Aldo, Matt Hughes, Chuck, Tito, Randy. There's not a single one of them that defended their title 11 times in a row. We are talking about some of the greatest fighters in history. Even Fedor only defended the Pride Heavyweight title 3 times. It is a ridiculous accomplishment to hold off the very best of a division 11 times in a row, and nobody that is currently active is even close. Amanda Nunes has 5, she'll need to double that and then win twice more to break DJ's record. John Jones hypothetically would have broken the record with his next win, but he was stripped twice, and so at his current streak of 3, it's going to be a long road to win another 8, assuming he doesn't move up to heavyweight. Mighty Mouse's record is going nowhere. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe. We've got 3 new videos or more for you every single week. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments below. Huge shout out to Max Randall for editing this video together. Follow him on Twitter at Max_Randall. Follow On Point MMA on Twitter, and have yourself a wonderful day.